I would like to preface this by stating that the following is not creative writing by any means. This is a story that I was originally told secondhand by my mother, but confirmed by my grandfather when I was about maybe 14 to 15. I leave it to you to form your own opinion, obviously, or to debunk it or whatever. Regardless, this story has always stuck with me my whole life. So, a bit of background. My grandfather passed away back in 2013 from cancer. But in his lifetime, he was a decent guy who helped a lot of people in various ways. After he met my grandmother, they both joined the army, and they served in Japanese-based U.S. Army hospitals during the Vietnam conflict, helping to save a lot of people. After his time with the Army, he also joined the Air Force for a stint. This all helped him to get his nursing degree and become an EA. After the Air Force, he became a clergyman at their church, and years later, he would become a Russian Orthodox priest. For over 40 years, he served as a priest too. And by the way, just for reference, in most sects of Orthodox Christianity, they allow clergy to marry unless they are a bishop or higher. My grandfather, though, was the sort of priest that the archdiocese would call up and say, "Father, we have these people in Alabama. They're believers, but they have no church within 100 miles that they can attend. Will you go there and help organize something?" Then, what would start as people holding liturgy in somebody else's living room with like 24 people would become a full-on church eventually. He repeated that more times than I've ever gotten a straight answer on. By the way, the only thing that I thought he was not so great for was always putting the church before his wife and 3 kids. Anyway, it was the mid-70s, and my grandfather had moved my mom, my aunt, and my grandmother to New Jersey to help one of these struggling churches that were without a priest. My mom was about 5 or 6 at that time, and she remembers this point in time pretty well too. One day, my grandfather was contacted by his bishop, who told him that his assistance was needed with something very serious. He told my grandfather that there was this young girl, 17 years old, who was a gypsy, and her family brought her to the monastery, claiming that she was apparently possessed. The monks there told the bishop that they believed this to be serious. "Will you go there to help them?" he asked. Now, my grandfather had been a priest for several years by that point, but understand that most priests who serve their entire lives are never asked to help exorcise a demon. Actually, the Roman Catholics require special permission from the Vatican to perform any exorcism rites. But he agreed without knowing what he was walking into. The story that I was told about the girl was that her name was Juliana, and her family were gypsies or travelers. She had come from a family that was heavily involved in occult practices, which shouldn't surprise anyone familiar with that culture. But Juliana was married to a man from another family in their clan. I don't know much about him, besides that he was a bit older than her, and that he also practiced a lot of magic. Juliana's family started becoming concerned when she started acting different. She was very moody, aggressive, wrathful, in fact, and just straight up mean. As time went on, her fits would get worse, and she would scream hurtful things at people for being asked simple things. But the family was terrified when the caravan that they lived in would rattle, rise up off the ground a few feet, and drop back down. And even on many occasions, things would fly off the wall or out of cupboards and break against the wall. They obviously tried their own rites and rituals to cleanse whatever darkness they believed was possessing Juliana, but nothing had worked. So that's when they turned to this monastery, desperately seeking help. And this is where Grandpa gets involved. He said that when he got there, everyone was in the church, another priest and a handful of monks, all preparing holy water, oils, saying prayers for help with God's strength. In the back of the church were several curious lay people that lived and worked on the monastery grounds. And then there were a bunch of Juliana's family members. I guess they had her in a room with a few family members until they were ready. But they brought her in and sat her on a chair in front of the altar. And this is where my grandfather said that he felt the air get thicker. She seemed really ticked off and was just sort of talking nonsense, laughing and spitting, trying to scratch and kick. They had a few people restraining her as she started getting violent. They semi-surrounded her and began praying and performing the full-on exorcism rite. As they progressed, she began growling, and this was when he said that things started happening. The chairs in the church began rattling and shaking, then moving on their own before levitating off the floor. Those curious people, and even some of Juliana's family, were so scared that they ran out of the church. He said that they continued praying and repeating the prayers over and over for several hours as things continued to move erratically on their own. And Juliana continued to curse them and their God, spit and scratch. She targeted each person, trying to get into their head and break their concentration. But they continued praying and asking God and every saint they could think of to help them banish this thing back to where it had come from and to leave this girl alone. Then she suddenly sat back rigidly and swung her head back. Her face began to contort and take on this inhuman shape, and her mouth opened wider than a human's mouth could really expand without completely separating the jawbone. Then a voice came from within her, in this deep, growly, sort of loud, demonic voice saying, "Leave me alone. I'm happy with her." But this voice didn't speak in English or in any other commonly spoken language. It spoke in a bit of a dead language that is native to the region of Romania and the steppes of Russia. It was a Slavic language. The monks knew this language, though, because many old church manuscripts are written in this nearly ancient language. This moment frightened everyone in the room, but they knew that they couldn't stop now. Not long after, Juliana passed out. She was unconscious and couldn't be woken up for a moment. She was breathing, but she was definitely in rough shape. So, they brought her to the hospital, and she was stable, but wouldn't wake up. She was under for about 2 weeks. Then, one day, she woke up, confused. She didn't understand why she was in the hospital and had no memory of the exorcism at all. In fact, she couldn't remember the last year and a half of her life. The very last thing that she could remember was being in her trailer. She said, "I was sitting at the table while my husband slept in our bed when I noticed something from the corner of my eye. I turned and saw my husband sleeping on his back, but there was this black cloud flowing out of his mouth and hovering above him in bed. Before I could scream, this black cloud rushed at me, and well, now I'm here." I think my grandfather was changed forever after that night. My mom tells me that she was 7 or so at the time, and she remembers that her father didn't speak for at least a couple of weeks and wore this sort of somber look on his face. He moved on eventually, but it definitely had a lasting impression. My mom says that he didn't tell her the story until she was a teenager, and he was trying to warn her off of dabbling in the occult, as you never know what you're inviting in. My grandfather wasn't the kind of guy who liked to make up stories at all. Actually, he liked to call people out for embellishment a lot. He usually didn't have much to say unless you asked him about something. He was a very intelligent man and read a lot. He also traveled across the US and had been to various countries over his lifetime. He served in 2 branches of the military and had a career as a medical professional. So I'd say he has some level of credibility, at least. In spite of the fact that I come from a religious family and grew up going to church regularly, I am not a religious person by any means. I've studied various belief systems and don't subscribe to any single one. So, this isn't like a Christian rant or trash-talking gypsies or whatever. I actually have a lot of respect for their heritage, but I just wanted to share a paranormal story that would never be heard if it wasn't for this platform. Imagine this. You move into a quaint, old house in West Hobart, Tasmania. It seems peaceful at first, the kind of place where the quiet is almost too quiet. And then, strange things begin to happen. You hear noises at night, soft whispers you can't quite make out, the sound of footsteps echoing through empty rooms. Objects shift on their own. You find things moved, broken, out of place. And then, as if you're slipping into a nightmare, you feel it. An invisible gaze on your back, a prickling sense of being watched. You're alone, but somehow you're not. This is the legend of the West Hobart Haunted House, one of Tasmania's most chilling stories. For decades, residents have whispered about this house, about the lives it's shattered, about the strange, sinister force that seems to cling to it like a shadow. And, like many others before you, you start to wonder, is it haunted? Or is it something much worse? It started in the late 1980s. A young couple had just moved in, hoping to start fresh in this quiet neighborhood. But it didn't take long before they began experiencing strange phenomena. Disembodied voices calling their names, doors slamming shut on their own, and a creeping sense of dread that never went away. At night, they'd hear faint sobbing, whispers just out of reach. Word spread through the neighborhood, and soon enough, the house gained a reputation as a place you didn't go near after dark. One by one, families would move in, and just as quickly move out. Every new tenant reported the same unexplainable horrors, sights, sounds, shadows. Some claimed to see ghostly figures lingering in doorways, while others spoke of invisible hands brushing against them in the dark. And then there was the madness. It wasn't just the strange sounds or moving objects. It was something far more disturbing. Many who lived here described feeling like they were losing their grip on reality. They'd suffer from hallucinations, sudden bursts of paranoia, and violent, unexplainable fits. One former resident even said that the house itself felt alive, as if it were feeding off of their fear, twisting their minds until they couldn't tell what was real and what was imagined. For years, the story of the West Hobart House grew, taking on a life of its own. People People said it was cursed, that it drove its occupants to madness. Locals avoided it, crossing the street rather than walk too close. And yet, no one could explain what made this house so terrifying. The stories, disembodied voices, ghostly apparitions, dark figures lurking, painted a picture of a place where something far beyond our understanding had taken root. But then, everything changed. A new investigation was launched to uncover what exactly was going on in that house. People were beginning to demand answers. Scientists, paranormal investigators, and even skeptics came together, determined to unravel the mystery. And what they found shocked everyone, because it wasn't ghosts. It wasn't supernatural. It was something far more insidious. The real culprit was a plant. Datura, also known as devil's trumpet, a toxic, hallucinogenic plant with a history as dark as the tales that haunted the house. Growing just above the property, its roots had spread into the rainwater tank, and every single resident, unaware, had been drinking contaminated water laced with traces of datura. Datura is not just any plant. Historically, it's been used in ritual practices by ancient cultures because of its psychoactive properties. Ingesting it can lead to intense hallucinations, paranoia, disorientation, and, in extreme cases, complete madness. And the residents of the West Hobart house had been consuming it daily, their minds unraveling bit by bit with every glass of water, every meal cooked, every sip. As word of the datura contamination spread, people were horrified. What they had mistaken for hauntings, spirits, and curses was really just a toxic, twisted reality seeping into their minds. The voices they heard, the shadows they saw, even the sensation of being watched, all hallucinations brought on by datura poisoning. The house wasn't haunted by ghosts. It was haunted by a poison. Imagine the horror of realizing that the terror you felt wasn't the work of something from beyond, but something far closer to home. Something creeping into your very bloodstream, clouding your thoughts, controlling your fears. The residents had been haunted not by spirits, but by their own minds, twisted by the poison of the devil's trumpet. But despite the explanation, the legend of the West Hobart haunted house has never truly died. There are those who say that even if the datura caused the hallucinations, it was something else entirely that led them to such terror. That maybe the plant only drew out what was already lurking, waiting to be seen. Growing up in a small town, you learn to see the subtle cracks beneath the surface, the whispered secrets, the things people don't talk about in daylight. My neighborhood was no different. Quiet, with old, creaking houses set behind tall, watchful trees. And among them, one house always stood out, the Hughes house. Polished and pristine, it was bigger and newer than the rest, almost out of place in its perfection. Mr. Hughes was a private man. He had a hard, expressionless face and eyes that seemed to size you up without ever showing a flicker of warmth. But what everyone noticed most was his car, a gleaming black sports car, so immaculate that it seemed untouchable. Every weekend, like clockwork, Mr. Hughes would be out in his driveway, polishing every inch until it shone like obsidian. I used to watch from my window, the monotony of his ritual casting an uneasy spell. His wife, Clara, was the opposite. Warm, friendly, always quick with a wave or a kind word. And their little girl, Lily, with her bright eyes and infectious giggle, brought a rare warmth to our street. Those small moments, the sight of them playing in the yard, Clara's laughter drifting on the wind, made their sudden disappearance feel like a punch to the gut. One day, they were just gone. No warning, no commotion. The police came knocking, questioning everyone. Mr. Hughes told them Clara had left, taken Lily, and vanished. There was no sign of struggle, no evidence to contradict him. But even then, there was something in his eyes, something flat and distant that made my skin crawl. Weeks turned into months, and the whispers began. Some said Clara had run off with someone else. Others hinted at something darker, something that lingered in the heavy silence of that house. I tried to push the thoughts away, but each time I saw Mr. Hughes, alone in that yard, the chill would return. His meticulous care for the car stopped. The once pristine vehicle sat dull and neglected, and his immaculate lawn grew ragged around the edges. He seemed thinner, jumpier, haunted. Then came the day that made everything unravel. My father was in the garage, fixing up his old truck, when he glanced over at the Hughes garage. The door was slightly ajar, and in the dim light, Clara's white Jeep sat like a ghost, cloaked in a thick layer of dust. It was a silent contradiction, a crack in Mr. Hughes's story that left us frozen. We stared at that Jeep, its presence screaming a truth no one wanted to speak. But then, just as quickly as we noticed it, it was gone. The garage door shut tight the next day, and the Jeep never appeared again. He'd sold it, perhaps, or hidden it. The mystery deepened, and Mr. Hughes became even more withdrawn, peering out his windows as if the street itself were watching him. Then, one night, everything changed. We were having dinner when a loud crash shattered the silence. My father grabbed a flashlight, told my mother and me to stay put, and stepped out into the cold night. From the window, I watched him knock on Mr. Hughes's door. It opened after what felt like an eternity, and Mr. Hughes stood there, pale and gaunt, eyes darting like an animal caught in a trap. My father came back inside, but he was different. His jaw was tight, his eyes clouded. When I pressed him, he finally spoke in a low voice. There was a pot on the stove, he said, eyes staring past me, and a gun on the counter. The unease in his voice was something I'd never forget. The scene at the Hughes' house left a mark that wouldn't fade. The days that followed felt suffocating. Mr. Hughes stopped going outside entirely. The car, once a symbol of his obsession, grew dirtier, abandoned like a relic of a life that no longer mattered. The house seemed to shrink, drawing into itself like a wounded thing. Neighbors exchanged glances, their voices dropping to whispers whenever his name came up. And the stories, dark, shifting tales of what might have happened in that house, spread like a shadow over the street. Years passed. I grew up, moved away, tried to forget. But the memories never fully left. Sometimes, late at night, I still see Clara's warm smile, hear Lily's laugh echoing in the distance. I think about the white Jeep, sitting in that garage like a silent witness, and the way Mr. Hughes's face looked when my father knocked on his door, haunted, hollow. I'll never know what truly happened behind those walls. The not knowing, the hints of darkness that can't be proven, are what linger the longest. Even now, thought of that house makes my blood run cold. Because sometimes the most terrifying stories are the ones that leave questions unanswered, that remind you evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it looks just like a man standing in his yard, eyes unfathomable, hands steady, as he polishes a car. If you enjoyed this story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next ones. With love, Lady Terror.